Thank you.
All these sessions are going to investigate Krishnaji's teachings. So I thought we should begin with how one should approach Krishnamurti's teachings, which may seem a bit strange because we have all been trained to read books for acquiring knowledge or learning skills and so on. But Krishnaji's teachings are meant for the transformation of consciousness. And as we said yesterday, knowledge and skills don't transform consciousness. So it needs a completely different approach from that of reading any other kind of book or literature or philosophy. And I thought we should dwell on that a little bit before we go into the details of the teaching. Krishnaji has said that the teachings are not in the book. They point to the truth, but they are not the truth. And one can use them like a mirror to look at oneself. The subject matter to be understood is not the teaching. It is ourselves. That's an important thing to realize. It's not simply a question of understanding what Krishnamurti is saying. What the purpose of what he is saying is to help us understand ourselves, which is what is called self-knowledge, because you can't get it from a book or from a teacher. It is a quest for truth. And in this field, truth is not just a correct idea or a correct concept. It's also not a rational conclusion. All that is in the field of the intellect and in the field of knowledge, where ideas can be passed on, conclusions can be communicated, where there is expertise, there is authority, and all that has no meaning in Krishnamurti's teaching. Even Krishnamurti himself is not an authority. Because if you accept something based on his authority, you don't have the truth. The idea of the truth is not the truth. In this field, truth lies at the level of perception, which is a sensory phenomenon, more holistic in nature than mere intellectual analysis. It includes the intellect as a sense, but it's not restricted to the intellect. It includes all the senses. And so that is one of the important things to remember in one's approach to Krishnamurti's teaching, that you have to keep all your senses acute and alert, and that the subject matter is not the teaching, but it is our consciousness, the human consciousness. And you learn about it through observing it, without judging, without distorting, without forming opinions, all of which is the normal process we have been educated into. Both agreement and disagreement are unintelligent responses to a statement. Because when you make a statement and I say I agree with it, it just means that I think the same thing as what you are thinking. And therefore nothing changes within me. And if I say I disagree with what you say, and I don't even consider it, I reject it, then also nothing changes within me. So there is no transformation, not even the transformation of ideas, not to talk of consciousness. So agreeing and disagreeing are both opposite but equally unintelligent responses to a statement. And that's true also to Krishnaji's statements, all statements. So what is an intelligent response? Can one listen to it? After all, words are being used to convey meaning. So the first question one has to ask oneself is, what does it mean? What do these words mean? And having got the meaning, the next question to ask is that true? And not to answer it from your knowledge or your previous experience, because all that is part of our conditioning and therefore distorts perception. So can one come upon an undistorted observation of the truth or perception of the truth, which is what is called an insight? And that requires a certain amount of freedom from the past, the known, and freedom from judgments and opinions. Now, thought and analysis are colored instruments because they arise from our memory. And the memory has all kinds of notions coming from our conditioning. The conditioning being dependent on where one was born, which family one grew up in, what were their values, what was their language, what was their culture, and so on. All that is part of our conditioning. And when you look through that conditioning, you always have a particular point of view, either the Hindu point of view or the Christian point of view. It's not a universal perception. And truth, ultimate truth is universal. It is the same for everybody. So it has to be free from the cultural background, which means free from your particular conditioning. Now, free doesn't mean that the conditioning is not there, because it's sitting there in the memory, in the brain. The brain has done its job of recording, and all that conditioning is sitting there. You can't wipe it away. It's not like something written on a blackboard which can be wiped off with a duster. So it is sitting there, but one can be aware of its limitation. One can be aware that it is a body of opinions which one has collected as one grows up, and that that's not necessarily true. So that one is willing to examine it. Then one is free. That means you can consider your own opinion in the same way as you consider your friend's opinion. That is, look at it, examine it, to find out whether it is true. And not find out intellectually, because if you use your thought process, you are using a colored instrument. So thought is not a good instrument to use for the perception of truth. It itself is a colored instrument. It arises from our conditioning, from the memory. Gross example which I can give is that the Hindu looks at the cow and sees a goddess there. And the American looks at the cow and sees beef. Both are seeing the same sight, but their responses are completely dependent on their conditioning. And so their response is not the truth. It's the truth when you can be free of that conditioning. Then what you see would be the same as what the other person sees. And that is the truth, universal truth. So truth lies at the level of perception and not at the level of ideation. If it lay at the level of ideation, it would be very simple. You can just read all that the Buddha has written, and you would have the Buddhist consciousness, Buddha's consciousness. But that's not true. You only have the knowledge of what the Buddha said. And the knowledge does not transform consciousness. So since we are not in the realm of ideation, but in the realm of perception. Perception is not something which your guru can give you or any book can give you. Only you can come upon perception because your senses have to be active. And it's a more holistic happening. So the truth cannot be communicated like an idea. So when Krishnaji says in his videos or his lectures, "Sir, don't accept what I say, investigate it," he's not just being polite. He means it because he has realized that if you just accept it, what you know is what he saw as the truth. But that's not truth for you. For you, it's just an idea of the truth that he saw. You have not seen that truth. So that's why you have to be a light unto yourself, which means you have to rediscover that truth for yourself. So what is the value of the teaching? The value of the teaching is that it creates a lot of questions. And the question is a jewel. But the answer is not the jewel. The answer given by somebody else is not the truth for you. So Krishnaji said, the answer to a question is not outside the question. It lies inside the question. So you can't search for it through somebody else or through a book or through Google. That would be just an intellectual answer, not the truth. So if you really want to come upon the truth, you have to investigate that question in your daily life through observing your consciousness with a learning mind. And a learning mind is free from prejudices and predilections, which means free from conditioning. And we have just said that you are free from conditioning when it is held lightly, when you don't identify with it, and you are not proud of it, and so on, so on. Otherwise, if you are attached to your conditioning, you become egoistic about your opinions. And the ego blocks perception because it is not interested in the truth. The ego is interested in defending the me and the mind, which includes all your opinions, all your knowledge, all that you are identified with, including your family, your property, everything. So the ego acts as a personal lawyer defending the me and the mind. Therefore, it's not interested in the truth. It's interested in victory for its own opinion. And that divides you from another who is similarly attached to his opinion and wants victory for his opinion. Then that's the beginning of a war. So to avoid that mistake, you need not to be identified with your conditioning, which doesn't mean you are not aware of that you are conditioned, but you don't give tremendous importance to it. Now, our conditioning has some factual elements, and we need to use that. The knowledge has facts also. The road to your house is a fact, and so on. There are many things which are factual, but there are also a lot of things which are not factual, which you take to be facts. And that's what constitutes an illusion. An illusion means you are taking something to be true when it is not true. In the sense, it is simply a construct of thoughts, your thought or somebody else's thought, which you have accepted. It's not part of nature. Therefore, it's not really true. It's just an idea or a concept or an image which you form. And you are accepting that as true. Then it constitutes an illusion. Or you are giving tremendous importance to something which is not really important. That's also an illusion. For instance, you give tremendous importance to the place where you were born or the country in which you were born, and you become patriotic about that country and so on. So all that constitutes the ego. And the ego blocks perception. It becomes like, the mind becomes like a personal lawyer. And the lawyer is not interested in the truth. It is interested in victory for its client. So one has to be very careful in relating to Krishnamurti's teaching. I remember when once someone said that he is a Krishnamurtiite, and this was communicated to Krishnamurti. And he said, he's talking nonsense. He has no idea what that means. Because his whole teaching says you can't follow another. If you decide to follow Gandhi, you can drink goat's milk, you can sleep on the floor, You can dress like him. Those things are all within your decision. But those were not important things about Gandhi. He didn't feel any hatred for his enemies. How will you get rid of hatred in your heart? And without doing that, are you really a follower of Gandhi? Just because you dress like him and you eat food like him? So all this business of following a wise man is nonsense. It's hypocritical. You can only be a true follower if you come upon that wisdom. So if you come upon the wisdom of Krishnamurti, then you can be like Krishnamurti. But if you imitate Krishnamurti, you are a pseudo Krishnamurti. You are not even your original self. So one has to guard against all these pitfalls in relating to the teaching. You have to know that there is no such thing as following. You have to know that it is not a technique to be learned or a new knowledge to be acquired. As he said, you can use it as a mirror in which to look at yourself. But that looking, it's our responsibility that it is not distorted by all kinds of opinions, judgments, conditionings. So that it's a true insight. That's what truth means, an undistorted perception of what is. That is the truth. It's not just an idea. It's also not just a law. I mean, those are other meanings we give to the word truth. We say the law of gravitation is a great truth about nature. That means certain cause and effect relationship is always being found to hold. That's one meaning we give to the word truth. The other is it's a true description of what actually took place. That is also called the truth. But the religious truth is neither of these. The religious truth is the undistorted perception of what is. Not your own construct. Now, why is it important to have this undistorted perception or this form of truth at the level of perception? Because it is the illusion that creates division, that produces all disorder in consciousness, meaning all our negative emotions, our consciousness is prone to. So Krishnaji said, disorder, namely negative emotions, has a cause. That cause lies in illusion, therefore it can be eliminated through discerning what is true and what is false. And that is the quest of self-knowledge, learning about oneself and freeing our mind and our consciousness of the false. When you see the false as the false, it drops away. Unless you are attached to it, then you will not drop it away. And therefore you have to be free from attachment to the illusion. You have to hold it like a scientist holds a theory. If there is one fact which shows that that theory is wrong, it drops it. There is no attachment to the theory. And if there is, then he is not really a true scientist. Because what is important is the truth and not your theory or your opinion. As in science, so also in religion. When you are really interested in the truth, you have to be quite detached from all opinion, including, of course, your own opinions. And that's why there is great importance of doubt. Doubt has a cleansing quality. Doubt which says, it appears to me like that, but I am not sure if that is true. So that you're always willing to examine it. And you are open to listening to your friend who points out that what you are saying is not true, without getting angry, without feeling any enmity because you're not defending a particular point of view. Indeed, you value criticism because that makes you look at what you think all over again. If I may cite a personal incident with Krishnamurti, I met him in Brockwood during 1980-81 in England. And he said to me, sir, the other day a man came here. He looked at the tent where I give these talks. He came and had lunch with us in the dining hall. He saw the grounds and the school. And then he came to meet me. And he said, you have a nice thing going on here, haven't you? You have a nice setup going on for you here. So I thought, why should someone suspect Krishnaji's motives? So I said, oh, sir, who cares? There are always people like that. But he held my hand and he said, don't brush him aside. I watched myself for a whole week before saying to myself, it is not true. So that's how one has to relate to criticism. Not reject it immediately, not accept it immediately either, but it gives you an opportunity to look at yourself. It may be true. And if Krishnaji needed to look at himself for a whole week before saying it's not true, maybe we need to look at it for 6 months before discarding it. So that is what a learning mind is. It's not a defensive mind. There's nothing to defend because you are not attached to anything which you are defending. Otherwise, you are creating a division. The ego creates a division between you and the other. And all that animosity, and we went into it yesterday, how war results from it. And we also said that the global problem is not separate from the individual problem. Because the individual division between two friends also arises in this way. I'm attached to my opinion, you are attached to your opinion, and therefore we fight over it. And it's the same between countries. So the global problem is not separate. And what goes on in our consciousness is manifesting in that war in a more spectacular fashion, that's all. And that's why it is necessary to transform consciousness. And only each one of us can do that. Because the illusions are creations of our own mind and nobody else can remove them. We can remove them through this quest for what is true and what is false. So let me now look at the nature of these illusions and how do they create disorder in consciousness. They lie at different levels of consciousness. I mean, this is all my investigation. It is not what Krishnaji has not said this in so many words. He has only said disorder has a cause and it lies in illusion, and therefore it can be ended. That's what he has said. Now, it's my investigation. What is the nature of our illusions? And at the very superficial level, they are what we call superstitions. They vary from culture to culture, religion to religion. If you are a Christian, you are scared of the number 13. If you are allotted number 13 in a hotel or in an airplane seat, you feel it's a bad omen. If you are a devout Christian, you may feel that. In India, people feel that if a cat crosses the road, it's a bad omen. And they turn their car around and take a different route. So it produces fear, and that fear is born of illusion. There are more sinister superstitions. I'll leave it to you to multiply the examples. But superstitions can cause a lot of disorder in our consciousness. Then there are these cultural illusions. Your idea of God, the Muslims' idea of God, the Hindus' idea of God, the atheist's idea of no God. Neither the Hindu knows what God is, nor the Muslim knows what God is. He's repeating what his ancestors have told him, and the Hindu is repeating what his ancestors have told him. And they are attached to what their ancestors have told. They call it culture, they call it their belief, and so it divides them from the other, and they hate each other for it. So it's illusion that divides us. If they had the humility to say, well, my culture or my parents said something else about God, your parents said something else about God. We don't know what the truth is. They would become friends and they would say, let's investigate together what could possibly be the meaning of God. But when you don't have that humility, when you are attached to your past and you derive importance out of that feeling of my culture, my ancestor were wise, and so on, so on. You have invested in it psychologically, and that divides you from the other one who has invested similarly in his culture. So that's why yesterday I said that identification is dangerous. It creates division between human beings. If you are identified with your country, with your religion, with a particular ideology, it separates you from another person who is identified with something else. And the two feel division and hatred, which eventually can also turn physical and war and so on. We saw that yesterday. So it's all right. You may have been born a Hindu and you may have grown up with certain ideas, but can you be open to examine that and be honest enough to say, I don't really know. This is what my ancestors have said. I don't know if that is true. That's the learning mind. The other is the reactive mind, the egoistic mind. It will not learn. The learning mind has to have this humility that what I know may be false, and therefore it's willing to examine and learn. So that you have to approach Krishnamurti's teaching with such a learning mind. He raises lots of questions. He points out that what you consider as love is not love. What you consider to be education is not true education. What you consider to be religion is not true religion. If you are identified, you feel insulted. And what the hell? I mean, I know what religion is. And who is he to tell me that that is not real religion? Then you are reacting. You are egoistic. You are identified. But otherwise, you are curious. He's saying, what is this? This man seems to be a wise man. Why is he saying that's not religion? Find out. You inquire. So that is how you have to relate with Krishnamurti's teaching. Not reacting, but approaching with a learning mind. Curious, wanting to learn for oneself. Unsure if one's own notions are true. Now, cultural illusions also include our concepts of success. The idea that you need to be rich and have a big job and a lot of money, and that is success. He questions that. He questions whether acquiring a lot of wealth is real success in life. So unless you inquire, your mind is trapped in all these views, which are simply imbibed from the surrounding. And because everybody is trying to compete and go to the top, you feel that's the right thing to do. You also want to do that. And so you are caught in the rat race. And he says, there is a wholly different way of living. No competition, no comparison. Being yourself and learning about yourself. Being sensitive so that you enjoy everything in life. You enjoy looking at a tree, you enjoy looking at the sky, you enjoy going for a walk. And when everything you enjoy, you don't need to chase pleasures and excitement. We need to chase pleasures and excitement because we are bored individuals. And we are bored individuals because boredom is a sign of insensitivity. And there are deep-rooted reasons why we have become insensitive. So he wanted to change education so that children grow up with sensitivity to nature, to beauty, to music, to art. We'll go into that in the talk on art of living. But because we have become insensitive, and being ambitious makes us insensitive because all our attention is directed only in that channel of wanting to succeed in that one direction. And therefore you don't pay attention to any other direction. And so you become insensitive. You don't have time to look at the river or the garden or the flower. And therefore you don't have a relationship with them. So there is deep-rooted causation why disorder takes place in our consciousness. And all that is born of illusion. Illusion means all these notions which we have acquired unquestioningly from society. And they dictate our life. So one is really living in illusion. One is not living in the real world. And that illusory world is creating a lot of mischief, producing the disorder in consciousness. So this quest for truth is the quest for ending illusion. And that is the quest for ending disorder in consciousness. Then you come upon order. So Krishnamurti taught that order has no cause. Just as your body has the order, cosmic order, which makes it run. All you do is eat some food and take some exercise. 1,000 things happen exactly as they should happen to keep your body healthy, without your being conscious of it or making any attempt to interfere with it. It's when there is disorder that there is pain, there is illness, and that has a cause, and that cause can be eliminated by medicine or exercise or whatever. And when you eliminate the cause, the body comes back to order. So order has no cause, but disorder has a cause, and therefore the disorder can be ended. Now, what is true of the body, Krishnamurti points out that it is true also of our mind. The disorder in our mind, in the form of conflict, in the form of anger, in the form of violence, in the form of jealousy, all negative emotions, it is, if you examine it deeply, you will find that it is rooted in some illusion or the other. And because it is arising out of illusion, it can be ended. If it's organic, it cannot be ended. The saint also, if he has a fall and hurts, he will have the biological pain. That's not psychological. It's only psychological suffering which can be ended if you do this inquiry. But sorrow is psychological suffering. All sorrow is psychological suffering. And that's why the famous sentence of the Buddha, that ignorance is the cause of sorrow, is not ignorance as lack of knowledge, but ignorance as illusion. So a lot of cultural illusions which we are not aware of, we take them to be truths. If you are born in India, you are attributed a particular caste, and all kinds of limitations follow for that caste. All that is false, all that is just man-made. It has no basis. Scientifically, it can be shown to be untrue. And yet it persists in society. And it divides people. And they marry only within their caste. And if they marry outside the caste, their relatives kill them and so on. So big division and violence, everything comes out of it, is born of all that illusion. Because no one has examined deeply and freed himself of this notion of caste. Somebody started this maybe 3,000 years ago or 5,000 years ago, and it still persists in society, dividing society. It's a cultural illusion. So very sinister. In the Islamic world, you find that they have other illusions. We don't even know how they arose, that a woman mustn't show her face to any man other than her husband. And therefore she has to remain inside a burqa and inside her home, and she can't go bicycling or out, and so on, all kinds of restrictions, moral restrictions. It is called our culture. Our women don't behave in that way, and so on. They don't see the cruelty in it because they call it culture. And that's an illusion. So like that, there are a lot of cultural illusions. I personally think that even the fact that we consider whole of Europe and America considers that animals can be eaten for food, killed and eaten for food. is also just an illusion in their mind. Because you can be a vegetarian and you don't have to kill the other species for your food. And they are sensate and they suffer. But you don't notice that suffering. You notice the suffering of what Hitler caused in the Holocaust. But your places which produce meat are holocausts. But you have become insensitive to it. You get used to it. And therefore you don't feel the suffering of those creatures. We have evolved from them. All that is the power of illusion. So the illusion can make us extremely cruel and extremely blind to all kinds of acts of torture. Then there are the psychological illusions which lie still deeper, which is what psychologists call complexes. They come because in childhood you have been traumatized or you have experienced some fear or extreme loneliness and things like that. And that memory of that episode, that pain, psychological pain, comes up again and again later on in life, and that creates a psychological disorder that lies deeper. It can also be eliminated, but you need to investigate that to that depth within yourself. And finally, the ultimate illusion, which lies still deeper, is this feeling of being a separate individual. The sages have pointed out that that is also simply a construct of our thoughts. And because we identify with the me and the mind, therefore we feel separate from the other person. Actually, we are not separate. We are all connected to each other. The ecologists are also pointing that out. And nowadays, they have found that even in the forest, all the trees in the forest, through their roots, they are connected with each other. A lot of these connections scientists are also discovering, which were not known earlier. The Buddhists pointed that out long ago. Probably through their consciousness, they had means of noticing it, perceiving it, that everything is connected to everything else. And the ecologists now say that the whole of the earth and its surroundings is like one single living body. You can either have the whole of it or you have none of it. If you pick and choose, you will lose it. The religious people said that thousands of years ago, that the earth and all its surroundings is one single family. We haven't yet realized the truth of that, but it has been preached, it has been told by people who have realized it. So there are all these illusions at various levels of our consciousness. And Krishnaji is pointing out that you have to begin to learn about yourself, inquire into yourself. Otherwise, these play havoc in your life and you blame the external circumstances. Whenever some sorrow comes or there is always an external happening. Somebody talks to you rudely, you feel insulted. So there is an external happening which caused the insult. But there is also a deep inner psychological happening which makes you feel, gives you the pain of insult. If you can free yourself of that, then you will notice that the other man is talking angrily and rudely, but you won't feel hurt. So you can free yourself of the psychological suffering. But our education has distracted our attention towards the external world. We spend a lot of time studying history, geography, science, how the sun shines, and so on, why the sky is blue. But we hardly have time to look into ourselves and see how our consciousness operates. So there has been a lopsided development of the human mind. Extremely knowledgeable, lot of ability, lot of power generated through knowledge and science and so on. And very little wisdom, very little understanding of oneself. And all the disorder in our society and in our life can be attributed to this lopsided development of the human being. So in order to rectify that, Krishnaji's teaching promotes this inquiry and exhorts us to learn about ourselves. He's not against learning about the external world. And he's not the first person to point this out. I mean, 2,500 years ago, the Buddha pointed that out. That self-knowledge is the real knowledge, and the knowledge of the world is inferior knowledge. Socrates said the same in the West 2,000 years ago. That self-knowledge is the only knowledge. He didn't recognize the other knowledge as knowledge at all. We respect these people, we admire them, we lay garlands on their pictures and worship them, but we haven't really listened to what they are saying or understood why they are saying it. And in modern times, Krishnaji has pointed that out in modern language in so many different ways, the necessity to learn about oneself. Indeed, he is on record saying that the entire purpose of whatever I am talking is to make you realize the need to understand yourself. Because without that, you become barbaric and you don't know. You blame others outwardly and so on. So there is disorder in our consciousness, and as we mentioned yesterday, that disorder projects into our relationships and therefore into our society as disorder in society. And therefore, all of us are responsible for the state of our society. We are co-creators of our society. Although we like to separate ourselves and feel that no, only those people are responsible and not me. But the seeds of that disorder are present in every consciousness, so long as you are not free of these processes. And it is that learning which one is required to do, which you can't get from simply reading Krishnamurti. You have to engage in this inquiry seriously. We have engaged in scientific inquiry. That's easier to do because it's about the external world, to find the order in the external world which already exists. The order in our psychological world, our consciousness, does not already exist. It exists if you don't create the disorder. So we are responsible for creating the disorder because we have not learned what is right thinking. It's not that thought is the culprit. Certain kinds of thinking is the culprit which creates the ego and so on. We'll go into it on another occasion. So I'll end it here. And it's important to approach Krishnaji's teachings in that way. No authority, no value of interpretation, no value of opinion, listening to all opinions, all interpretations without accepting or rejecting them, and creating questions out of them. That's the role of thought, to create the question, healthy use of thought, but it can't answer the question. If it answers the question, it becomes an intellectual answer, and that's not the truth. It has to be answered through awareness, through watching, through observation, and connected with daily life. If it is not connected with daily life, religion becomes an escape from daily life. It has become, in the world, all the religions have become an escape from, to make a man feel virtuous without actually discovering what virtue is. It was Socrates who pointed out that there is only one virtue, and that is order in consciousness. The Buddha also pointed out in the East, and Krishnamurti is saying the same, that virtue is not a particular action. It is a state of being, a state of consciousness, and that's order in consciousness. So that's the nature of this quest. The quest for ending the disorder in consciousness, which is the same as the quest for discerning what is true and false, what is false, and dropping the false, no attachment. Thank you. I'll end it here, and perhaps we can have some questions depending on how much time we still have.
Thank you, Professor Krishna. So hello, everyone. Now we are entering the question and answer portion of our session today. And everyone is welcome to enter questions for Professor Krishna in the chat. I will read the questions in the order they were entered. And the first question is from Kartik Gupta. One identifies oneself with one's memories and experiences. One's identity is false and illusion. Identity is conceptual and it propagates conditioning. Is one's personal identity significant and meaningful?
If you are not investing in it psychologically, it just is a factual thing. That I was born in India, that I have an Indian passport, that I was brought up in a theosophical family, and so on. Those are facts. But when you become proud of your past, when you invest in it psychologically and derive importance out of that, that is what causes the problem. Actually, there is an identity. I am an Indian, I do have a passport, but it doesn't mean I support India, right or wrong, whatever they do, I support. And I'll kill myself for the victory of India. All that is nonsensical. It's propaganda. So you have to have this discernment of what is true and what is false, what is propaganda and what is factual. The factual doesn't create problems. So all these problems are psychological.
So the next question is from Taj. How can one see the true unique difference in case teaching approach? Is there a word other than teachings to what Kay is trying to point out for humanity to live in peace?
Yes, Krishnamurti was not happy with the word teachings, but he said, we considered other words, works, but there's iron works, there's electrical works, and so on. So that's also unsatisfactory. So ultimately, he resigned himself to the word teachings. But he pointed out that the teachings are not in the book. That the teaching basically says you need to understand yourself, that the subject is not the teachings to be understood, but you are the subject to be understood. And he gave some talks in Sri Lanka, I think in 1948, which were brought out as a small booklet called the Book of Life. And there he said, you are the book. And the first chapter is this, and the second chapter is this. And he revealed all the different aspects of our consciousness in that. I'm sure you can find that in the collected works. If that book probably is no longer available in print, but in libraries and so on, you can get that. Sri Lanka Talks, it was called. It's very fascinating what he talks about. The need to understand yourself.
And we have a question from Urmi Kapdi. Kay has said stimulus and reaction are the same. It's like ebb and flow. But a man who sees his conditioning understands that ego is destructive and is somewhat free of his conditioning. Can such a person be really friendly with an egocentric, insensitive person? Will it not be a disturbed relationship?
If you are really free and don't feel insulted, don't feel hatred, and so on, you would have tremendous compassion, because that man is suffering out of his ignorance. And the only way you can help him is help him to free himself of that ignorance if you can. But we have our own ideas about helping, giving alms, giving money, helping a person acquire some skills, and so on. And all that is trivial help. Real help is to help a human being get rid of his illusions, get rid of the disorder in his consciousness. And that is very difficult to do. But that's what Krishnamurti was doing for 70 years all over the world, helping human beings, not asking anything in return for it. But you can't be like him because it has to come from within you. You can only live with the wisdom you have. But your wisdom is not static if you have a learning mind. It grows. That's all that I can say. And we all know how we grow in knowledge and in experience. How does a human being grow in wisdom is what Krishnamurti is pointing out. Now, how far you will grow is up to you. You may be able to go even beyond him. Or you may remain stuck somewhere. That's up to you. It's not the teacher's role. So he said, you are the teacher and you are the taught. There is nobody else who can help you with that because nobody else can give you the truth. They can point out, which is what he was doing. But you have to walk the way and discover the truth for yourself.
Now we have a question from Hirandani. Is seeing of psychological illusions by perception, not by ideation? And that's the question.
Yes, the ideation is only a fragment of your being. It's the intellect, which is one fragment of your being. Unless there is a perception which is holistic, it does not transform consciousness. We'll discuss the transformation of consciousness in another talk, where we will go into this in great detail. But Krishnamurti pointed out that we have been taught to judge and condemn certain traits in ourselves. Anger is evil, jealousy is wrong, and so on. So you don't pay attention and you don't learn. But actually, you can treat these disorders as learning opportunities. If you feel jealous of somebody, that jealousy is telling me, Krishna, there is something in you which you haven't understood. Find out what that is and put it right. So I have also the opportunity to learn about it. If I may give an analogy, it's like our consciousness is like a huge banyan tree. The root is the ego. And one branch is fear, another branch is violence, another branch is jealousy, another branch is rivalry, etc. Now, one branch at a time manifests in our consciousness and produces its pain. And we are interested in getting rid of that pain. So we do something or the other to assuage that pain and cut off that branch. But we have not gone to the root. So another branch grows and another problem comes up in life. We saw that yesterday. All these efforts of United Nations and so on have been so superficial. You keep on having wars. You never solve the psychological problem creating the war. So it persists. In the same way, if the ego is still there, the root, the problems will keep coming. You may solve one problem, another problem will arise. But whenever there is a negative emotion, which is very perceptible because it creates pain, psychological pain. If you have a learning mind and you approach it with a learning mind, you can learn and not stop just when the pain of that particular manifestation ends. Because every branch is connected to the root. But we give up. We don't go all the way up to the root because we are only interested in getting rid of the pain. We are not really interested in discovering the truth. Otherwise, you can uproot the whole tree, which is what would be enlightenment or moksha or whatever, freedom. That's just a metaphor to explain things, but basically the difference between Krishnamurti and other religions is that Krishnamurti says every manifestation of disorder in your consciousness is an opportunity to learn about yourself. He doesn't condemn it. He says, look at it with a learning mind. And that learning mind is the religious mind. So his statement, which angers many people, is that the temples and churches and mosques are not religious places because there is no learning taking place there. This kind of learning, self-knowledge or learning about oneself or freeing oneself of illusions. But a school can be a religious place if it promotes this kind of learning, along with the normal education in techniques and knowledge. So that was his attempt in education.
We have a question from Prasad Mulapuri. Sir, K does not believe in practice or gradualism. In spite of studying him for 40 years, there has been no radical change in one's consciousness. He said towards the end that very few people have really understood him. So is all this effort a waste of time?
As we pointed out earlier today, you don't have to understand the teaching. You have to understand yourself. And he has very clearly said that the teaching can help you to understand yourself if you use it as a mirror to look at yourself without any distortion. But it demands a certain seriousness, a certain honesty, a certain detachment, so that you go all the way, and a certain passion, so that you go all the way to perceive that. Now, you may not go all the way. No? As much understanding as devolves, that's your fate. That's what you get. That is so also in academics, isn't it? I learned physics. As much physics as I learned and know, to that extent, I know how the rocket goes to the moon and how the satellite works or how the computer works and so on. But I have not become Einstein. I haven't understood everything. So it's the same. You start this inquiry into truth, dropping the illusions. As far as you go, that's where you get. To expect to say that I will learn physics only if I can become Einstein would be stupid. And it's the same here, that I'll engage in self-knowledge only if I can become Krishnamurti or I can become enlightened. Then don't engage. And you continue with all your bigotry and casteism and everything and suffer. So you will free yourself of as many illusions as you do, and to that extent your disorder becomes less. To that extent you have more energy to do the inquiry. You are not wasting energy. But it's wrong to make a destination and say, I didn't reach there, and that it's fault of Krishnamurti that I didn't reach there.
We have one more question from Chandra. Are we not concluding when we say one should not eat meat or kill animals to eat, etc.? Is this not an illusion of religion and cultural conditioning on someone's eating habits? Is this not division and distorted observation idea, right?
It can be if it is coming from that kind of comparison and feeling of superiority of one's culture over another. Or it may not be if it is coming out of the feeling that there is so much suffering of sentient beings and that people are blind to that suffering. It depends on what your inner workings and motives are. This inquiry is not about blaming anybody, but in general, pointing out that all of us human beings, we suffer because we have ignorance, and that ignorance is in the form of lot of illusions, which can be ended through this inquiry. But we have not really seriously learned to engage in this inquiry. We have spent 20 years, 25 years learning the scientific inquiry, and we've become very skillful at that. But we haven't even given a few hours to this inquiry. This inquiry is far more difficult than the scientific inquiry, that apart.
I will read the next question. In your talk, you said that truth lies at the level of perception, not ideation. Maybe we could say that the teachings are a pointer, that they are not the truth. And if we could use that analogy, is there a place for studying many different pointers or teachings from around the world to understand the commonalities as complementary pointers?
That's what people do in the study of comparative religions and so on. But all that is ultimately intellectual and academic, like philosophy. The professor of philosophy doesn't have a transformed consciousness. He is ambitious, he is greedy, he is fighting with his neighbor and so on, like anybody else. But he has all these ideas in his head. So it becomes mental property. Mental property doesn't transform consciousness, just as physical property does not transform consciousness. So it's not something to be accumulated and it will bring about this change. It is something that has to be perceived. So Krishnamurti, some places said, perception is real action. What we call action is not real action, but perception is real action. that means you perceive the truth, then that alters things, and therefore that is real action. The rest of it is sort of aspirin.
Now, the following is the last question we currently have for today. We may have another 5 or 8 minutes for additional questions if there are, so please enter them in the chat. So the question is it that we are strongly attached to our illusions that prevents us from truly opening up to investigating, to learning, to truth? Is it that our illusions create a strong sense of belonging, which is a basic need for human beings?
Yes, I think that there is a strong attachment to our illusions. That's why all patriotism for one's country is a strong illusion, attachment to an illusion. To our religion and culture, certain values and so on is also an illusion, attachment to one's own illusion. And it creates division, and you don't see that far how much disorder it is producing in society. So you are in a way fooling yourself, feeling very virtuous, doing things and so on, not realizing that you are playing a lot of mischief in society.
We have a question from Karthik Gupta. How does a person with consciousness without illusions live in this world?
That question was answered in the Gita by Krishna, because Arjuna asked that question of Krishna. How does the liberated man live? How does he sleep? How does he eat? How does he perform his work? In what way is he different from the ordinary man? And Krishna gave a long reply, which you can read in the Gita. But the summary of it, as I understood, was that he outwardly, he will look the same as the ordinary man. He sleeps like the ordinary man. He eats like the ordinary man. He works like the ordinary man. But it's not the same thing, because he doesn't do it for the same reason. So it's at the motive level that the motive is not egoistic. And in the other case, the motive is egoistic, but the work being done is the same.
And we have a question from Kalyan. How to perceive medicinal intrusion on the name of treatment to our physical disease?
Can you repeat the question? I couldn't grasp it.
The question is how to perceive medicinal intrusion in the name of treatment to our physical disease.
I still don't understand. What is medical intrusion?
Medical treatment of our physical ailments.
Yes.
Maybe I would like to invite Kalyan to clarify the question. I'm not sure I would be qualified to interpret.
Yeah, if you can explain in a little more detail in the chat.
Yeah.
Maybe if I get the question, I can perhaps respond to it.
Great. So in the meantime, I will read a question from Sumitra. Is it really possible to die to the past, to one's location in life, even when one is investigating it?
It is possible because people like the Buddha, Jesus Christ, Krishnamurti, perhaps Ramana, Kabir, they are evidence that they could die to the past and live a different life. So obviously, if it's possible for them, it is possible for a human being, but it's rare. Surely it's rare, because out of millions and billions of human beings, only a handful were able to come out of their past totally. For example, the Buddha was brought up as a Hindu and trained as a Hindu, but he freed himself of casteism and animal sacrifice and everything and came upon a new teaching altogether. And so did Jesus. He was brought up as a Jew, but he came out of it and gave his completely different teaching of showing your other cheek also and so on. So there have been sages who have died to the past and come upon something totally new in life. Krishnamurti also was brought up as a theosophist for many years, and theosophy was full of theosophical ideas and so on, must have been conditioned into them. But he was able to discover something totally new, that it's not an evolutionary process, that truth is a pathless land, whereas the theosophists believed that different religions are different paths to the same truth. And he said, truth is a pathless land. So he did discover something new. In other fields also, people are able, how does any great discovery take place? How did Einstein, who was trained in classical physics, discover relativity and discover that space and time are not independent of each other, when that was a solid assumption and premise in classical physics? So it's possible for a human being to come out of his the past training and discover something new. The only difference is that those things are in a particular field, in music or in dance or in science, because they're asking only a limited question. Whereas in the religious field, it is connected with the whole of consciousness. So can one live with a creative consciousness, which is totally free from all conditioning from the past? Some people have been able to do it. So obviously it's possible for a human being. But not everybody may be able to do completely to that extent. But to whatever extent you are able to do, to that extent, you travel light. For example, supposing you are conditioned into comparison and competition, and you discover that comparing oneself with others is like a disease of the mind, which creates a lot of problems and conflicts and so on. And therefore you drop comparison, which is not too difficult in life. You have freed yourself of inferiority, superiority, hierarchy, jealousy, envy. A lot of disorder ends, no? You're not totally free. You're still not free of habits or other things. So there is partial freedom, because some illusions you have ended, but there are other illusions which are still going on in you. So to the extent to which you are able to end the illusions through this inquiry, to that extent, you live in a more orderly life. I would say that, yes. It's another matter that one should not be satisfied with going halfway, and therefore continue this inquiry.
Sir, it's time to close at this point, and it's
Yes.
up to you. It's up to you, Professor Krishna, sir. Shall we close?
No, that's fine. We have ended all the questions, so that's fine.
We have two things outstanding, and the first one is we have an additional clarification from Kalyan to the question we read earlier.
Yes.
And
Yes.
then we have one extra question from Prasad. So what I would like to suggest is we could either address one of them or both now, or we could begin with them next session.
No, let us finish it today, because that's relevant to today's topic. We will lose the context in next session.
Okay,
It's
great.
only 5 minutes more, yeah.
So now I will read the original question we had from Kalyan. The original question: how to perceive medicinal intrusion in the name of treatment to our physical disease? And the additional input, we have two additional parts. Isn't the medicinal application a form of suppression of disease, whereas the conventional term of the medicinal suppression is cure? How one to perceive this confusion?
It's a complex thing. I'm not an expert in medicine, but in general, I would say that there are illnesses which come from infection. And so there you need to, if you take a medicine which kills the infection, you come back to health. That sounds scientifically valid. The other one, where there is suppression of symptoms and so on, it depends on what it is in particular. But sometimes you also buy time to allow nature to heal. And supposing you have enormous pain and you can't stand it, then aspirin also has a role, no? You lower the pain. You are buying time to let body heal that. So it depends on the particular situation, and there may be situations where it is valid. There may also be situations where the doctor was mistaken.
So we have two questions left. I missed seeing the one from Naman. So maybe these will be the last ones. If someone has strong attachment to an illusion such as being affected by other people's opinions, if someone is aware of that in daily life, and if that illusion still does not go away or reduce, what is one to do?
Put up with the suffering. What else will you do? You have tried your best and it hasn't worked. So accept your fate. Why should all good things happen to you? So some things don't happen. You have to give up this assumption that you should be able to achieve everything. You may not be able to achieve some things. Just look around you. People are suffering so much. And you are saying, I should not have any suffering. Well, life brings suffering. Can you learn from that suffering is the important question, not whether suffering can be avoided. In fact, at a certain point, Krishnamurti said, I remember reading, sir, invite sorrow, because sorrow is a great teacher. Why do you want to avoid sorrow? So if your love for learning is that passionate, you can invite sorrow, because sorrow is a great teacher. These are individual decisions people have to take and take the consequences of their decisions. We all take risks, no? We all take risks. When you go on the road, you take a risk. You climb a hill, you take a risk. It's all right. Sometimes you will fall. Last question.
Last question from Prasad. Sir, what is dying to the past? Does it mean the memory of the past is eradicated? Or does it simply mean that one frees himself from the hold of the past on him?
I think the latter. The past doesn't grip you. You can question it, get out of it. You are not completely trapped in it. I would think so. Although I must add that in particular, in the case of Krishnamurti, something very mysterious happened. And he lost his entire memory of his childhood. So he is on record saying that when you ask me questions about my childhood, I am narrating to you what my friends of that time have told me, whom I trust that it must be true. But I myself have no direct recollection of that past. So it was like being reborn. In your next life, you don't remember things of this life. So if you can be reborn within this life itself, you would lose your memory. That's a very rare happening. There's great mystery because he went through all that process and so on. We don't know what that was.
Thank you very much, Professor Krishna.
Will we end this at this point, sir?
Yes, please.
Thank you, everybody. We will see you all next Saturday, California and India time. Please adjust your clocks according to where you are dialing in from. Thank you very much.
You're right.
Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.